Good afternoon. This week we're going to give you a little bit of help with responding to 8-mark questions. Now, the reason we're doing this is because it does seem to be an area that quite a few of you fret over, but there really is no need to worry. So we're going to provide this for you so that you're enabled to answer this week's practice questions on Satchel 1. When you have answered them, please make sure you upload them to Satchel 1 so that your geography teacher can give you some feedback. We will cover assessment objectives. We will also cover the 2 command words, and we'll look at paper 1 8 markers versus paper 2 8 markers, and there is a slight difference. Now, it is not possible to effectively respond to 8-mark questions on papers 1 and 2 without having a decent understanding of Edexcel's assessment objectives. They are as follows. So AO1, which is your knowledge. So you show off what you know about places, about facts, events, definitions, things like that. AO2, you need to show that you can make those connections and demonstrate your understanding. So the different processes and concepts in geography, how human factors might link to physical factors, and the type of language that you would use demonstrates that you can link one thing to another. So you would say the impact of this is, this means that, etc., etc. Now, AO3 is incredibly important on both papers. You use AO3 to demonstrate that you can make judgments based on all of the evidence placed in front of you. And then finally, AO4 is showing off your geographical skills. So you might be presented with a map, a table, something like that, and you need to demonstrate that you can interpret it. You need to show that you have those cross-curricular skills that we use in geography, such as maths. Are you a good inquirer? Things like that. But the inquiry side of things, we don't really get into until later in paper 2, where your questions are based on fieldwork. So don't worry about that right now. Now, 8-mark question command words are as follows. Remember, command words, the words that tell you what you have to do. So you will either see assess in the question, or you will see evaluate. There is a difference between the two. Now, with an assess question, we talk about the significance or importance of something. You discuss, you're going to give consideration to all of the factors and then actually identify which are the most significant. And that can be significance in different ways. Does it have environmental, social, or economic significance? Does it have long-term or short-term significance? Things like that. Okay, so you need to be able to categorize, classify, and think on different time scales and scales in terms of area as well. Now, evaluate, slightly different. You're talking about the relative success of something. The difference between the assess and evaluate questions that is very clear is that on an evaluate question, you do have to provide a conclusion that kind of brings together everything you've been discussing. You're going to draw on the evidence, as it says, such as strengths, weaknesses, alternatives, and relevant data. So these are the 2 command words you will find in 8-mark questions on either paper 1 or 2. Now, on paper 1, you will have 3 8-mark questions, 1 for each of the subtopics studied in component 1. So you will have 1 for hazardous earth, so that is either hazardous climate or plate tectonics. You'll have another 8-marker for development dynamics, and a third 8-marker for challenges of an urbanizing world. And one of those will have marks assigned for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Now, it is really important to note that all 3 of those 8 markers on paper 1 ask for AO2 and AO3. Rewind this video to remind yourself what we mean by Assessment Objective 2 and Assessment Objective 3. Now on paper 2, there's more than 2 8 markers, but the ones we're focusing on are just questions 4 and 7 on every paper 2. Question 4 and question 7 present something that you have not seen before. So it could be a thematic map, it could be an article, it can be a table of data, it could be a graph. It's asking you for AO3, just like the paper 1 questions, but now it's asking you for AO4. Take some time to rewind and just double check that you know what we mean by Assessment Objective 3 and Assessment Objective 4. Now going back to paper 1, you need to make sure you've read the question really carefully. Is the question asking you to speak about a developed country? So in the most simplistic terms, a country that's usually wealthier, has well-developed infrastructure? Or is it talking about a country that is developing or emerging? So a country that, for all intents and purposes, is slightly poorer, and maybe doesn't have the most developed infrastructure, and maybe is experiencing some demographic challenges, so population challenges. Read the question carefully. The geography department, we have seen many examples of young people who've lost out on their 8 marks simply because they misread the question and spoke about a developing country instead of a developed country, or vice versa. Going back to paper 2 questions. Now, for paper 2 questions 4 and question 7, this is something that is so important. You will see a resource. You need to spend some time just reading through that resource, making notes on it, scribbling stuff on it, making sure you are picking it apart and you fully understand it. Why? Because 4 marks are dedicated just for AO4. This is just showing that you can demonstrate your geographical skills and that you can interpret the resource. So I've written there, think of things like highest versus lowest in the data. Think of range. Think of any anomalies you see. Think of relationships. And also where you see these different things occurring. So you might need to use compass directions. You might need to use place names. Remember, 4 marks are dedicated just for you to demonstrate that you can interpret the resource. So at the very least, every single student should be able to get a minimum of half marks on questions 4 and 7 on paper 2. Now this week, you have 2 8-mark questions, one of which has spelling and punctuation and grammar attached to it. The first question we've given you is from paper 1, component 1. So evaluate the impact of globalization on the economy of a named emerging country. Now, just pause and think about which country we have studied at Bishop Challoner as our case study. So this is an evaluate question, so you need to make sure we're talking about how successful has globalization been on actually shaping the economy of that country that we've studied, okay? You will then end with a conclusion that summarizes the real impact of globalization, if any, on the economy of that country. For your paper 2 question, the command word is assess. So you are judging the significance of something. The question says, assess the influence of geology on the landscape of the UK. So how significant has geology been in shaping the landscape of the UK? The maps, which are attached to the Satchel 1 task, show in the first one where we find metamorphic and igneous rocks, and in the second, the relief, the height of the land in the British Isles. So the question is essentially asking you, how significant, how influential is geology, rock type, on the landscape of the UK? So the relief of the land in the UK, the shape of the land in the UK. So your paper 1 question needs you to think about AO2 and AO3, while your paper 2 question is asking you for AO3 and AO4. Do not forget, spend a good amount of time out of those 8 or 9 minutes that you would normally spend answering an 8 marker for your paper 2 question, just picking apart what the 2 maps show. Nothing placed in the exam paper is put there by accident. It's there for you to take notice. If you have any questions about responding to these 2 questions, please do not hesitate to contact me or your geography teacher on the relevant email addresses. We wish you the best of luck. Have a great week.